So, the title of this class, obviously, is Dealing with Conflict. I haven't had the opportunity to be in the class over the last 3 weeks that Dan started it, but I have had the privilege of watching it on the video, so it's always awesome to have that opportunity. Dan's going over a lot of heavy stuff, isn't he, guys? You know, James is a letter that is a punch in the gut. Has anybody, after reading James, felt that? Yeah. Why is that, Jim? What is it about James that's a punch in the gut?
It speaks to me and makes me know that I need to work more on what I need to do.
Yeah. That's the word. It does convict us. Okay, and it should. That's its part of its design is to convict us. So it is a punch in the gut. You know, I was looking at a commentary, and he said, out of the 106 verses in James, 60% of the verses are imperatives. Okay, that is, they're statements with a tense that is supposed to make us be exhorted to apply. Okay. It's not just about knowledge. Knowledge is important, okay? But it is about doing, okay? And James says that. Don't be what? Just hearers of the word, but doers, okay? And that's what it's about, okay? And so we're going to touch into it today, but also I want to look at some of the world in which James was in and the context that these people would have understood this information. Okay? The world that James lived in. Because I think my personal conviction is that to fully understand how it is to apply to me, I need to understand how they would perceive what they're being told within the culture that they lived in. Okay? What was the culture that they lived in? What was the power that they lived under? Well, obviously it was ancient Roman rule. There was good news at the time. That good news was the good news of Caesar Augustus. And this was spread around the ancient time, okay? Because Caesar Augustus had done what? For the historians in here, he had brought a level of peace to the world that was fragmented and warring all the time. But that peace that he brought to the world resulted in his emperor status and his view of himself as the incarnated power of the Roman world. And therefore he was hailed not only by himself but by others as what? Savior and Lord. Okay? Savior. Have we heard those terms before, guys? Sure we have. But this peace that the emperor has brought, it came with a price, didn't it? There was a very dark side of Rome's peace. I'm going to share with you a couple of readings from Michael Gorman from his book, Apostle of the Crucified Lord. But there was a dark side to Rome's peace that cannot be forgotten. Romans established and maintained their empire through conquest, subjugation, and intimidation. It was, in other words, peace came through war. Security came via domination. The Romans invaded and enslaved. They moved the conquered in and out, wherever they wanted to. They formed new colonies, and they refounded old cities as their own colonies. They imposed taxes and tributes to maintain this empire. And its peace among the subjugated was maintained through that. And they had a deterrent to make sure that those who might threaten this peace, that those might understand the consequences. And that was crucifixion. Does that make sense? So when people in Rome in that time, or the countries and areas around, saw people being crucified, because that was a public display, wasn't it, guys? What would they know? They would look at that individual and recognize his shame, but they would also recognize what? The power that controls. Gerard Linsky is a scholar who's basically brought into this worldview a diagram that has the vertical axis of power and privilege, and then the horizontal axis of number of people. Within the Greco-Roman world, the image that he presents is a tower that is very small at the top and comes out and spreads wide. Does that make sense? So the power and the privilege was at the top, and there was the ruler. And then after the ruler came the governing class. And this is basically only 3% of the population. The ruler, who is the emperor, and the governing class. And below them were the merchants, the retainers, the priests, the laborers and the slaves, the artisans. And below them were, and that we may look at thinking about our middle class, but it wasn't like our middle class. These people had no political power. Okay. But we live in a period of time where we're told that we can make a what? We can make a difference. We can make a change. We're all individuals. We can do that. But that was not the world that they lived in. That's not the world that they lived in. And then below the laborers, the artisans, the retainers, the merchants, was the unclean and the degraded. And below them were the expendables. What does that mean, to be an expendable? Any idea? What's that? It doesn't matter. You provide nothing to the game. Okay? There is no value in you. And if that's what you were, you're tough luck. That's what you were. Does that make sense to the world? That the gospel appeared? It wasn't just in the Greco-Roman world at that time. In the Old Testament, you remember when the Assyrians and the Babylonians took over and captured Jerusalem, and they left and they dispersed everyone? They left a group of people there that they viewed as what? Worthless. They had no value that they could bring to the structure that was there. So consider, as you're going through James, okay, that this is the world at which these words were expressed. Another paragraph by Gorman in his book, Apostle of the Crucified Lord, a theological introduction to Paul and his letters. At the pinnacle was the emperor, and beneath him were the senators. Then there was the equestrians. This was a class of highly ranked military and political figures. Then the decurions, aristocrats with land and other forms of wealth, but only local political power. Supporting the governing class was a network of retainers, that is, political and religious officials, priests, government functionaries. And their role was to keep the machinery of the power running and attended to the needs of the elite. This entire group of the elite comprised about 3% of the population. And further down the tower were those of some means, but little or no political power, like merchants and successful artisans. They were not like the Westerners call middle class, though they did exist in the middle. They constituted anywhere from 5 to 15% of the populace. The remaining 85% consisted of the working lower class slaves and free persons, including the other artisans, craftsmen, and merchants, and below them the working poor and day laborers. And at the very bottom were the impure and the expendables, essentially those without any status, wealth, or skills to contribute to the value to those above them. So the value of a person was how much they could contribute to those above them. Okay? Widows, orphans, prisoners, beggars, or those with disabilities, they were those people that were considered no value. And when you think of this and you go back and you'll read there in James when he talks about, you want but you don't have. And he talks about those people that are oppressing them, the wealthy. You understand what I'm saying? This just gives you a better understanding of the dynamics that was going on at that time. Okay? You can see from this that for the vast majority of the population, the main priority was simply to survive. Okay? Simply to survive. And they are one catastrophe away of not surviving. That's the hierarchical arrangement of the world that James was written to. Questions, comments? Can you see how this can affect how we look at what we're reading? No? Yes? Another thing that we need to be aware of was the culture. The culture that they lived in was referred to, and I'm just learning about this, relatively speaking. So, I'm sure someone out there that understands history a lot better than I do understands what an honor-shame culture is all about. Has anyone ever heard the term honor-shame culture? Got Lee? Again from Gorman. Simply defined, honor and shame referred to the ongoing attribution or loss of esteem by one's peers, family, social class, city, and so on. In the Roman society, this respect, this honor, was based primarily on such things as wealth, education, rhetorical skills, family pedigree, and political connections. These were the culture's status indicators. Does that make sense? You follow what I'm saying there? The values of people was not based on the person. The value of people was based on what social class they were in or what they could offer. These were the status indicators. In this context, self-esteem would be conceived as a ridiculous oxymoron. For the only esteem one has is bestowed by not by the self, but by the group. So when we think of self-esteem, what do you think about when you think about self-esteem? Has anybody ever been taught about self-esteem? Okay, so we got an opinion. Okay, so I'm asking for some opinions. All right. Self-worth, exactly. Okay. Confidence. All right. We try to teach our children to have what? Good what? Self-esteem. Okay. The point is, in this honor-shame culture, Garman's saying that self-esteem was an oxymoron, okay? You did not get esteem from where? Self. It didn't come from self. It came from your family. It came from who you were working for. It came from your intellect or your education or your wealth. You see what I'm saying? And the culture understood that. Okay? And there was peer pressure to stay in your lane. Okay? To stay in your lane. And there was honor for those that stayed in their lane. That knew where their role was. Okay? Okay. And that's a good point, Barry, because honor shame it's not here, but it's not the dominant culture here. You follow me? And at that time, honor shame was the dominant. Everything was set up relative to that, okay? And the hierarchy of it just fed into that culture. Okay, but there is and Dan even brought it out over the last, about the postmodern view of things, okay? The postmodern view takes self-esteem and elevates it to the point of where you are what you want to be, okay? And there's no need for anything else. You design your own story. Okay, where in an honor-shame culture, these people, their story, their narrative was determined when they were born relative to the value of the class or the skill level or the wealth that they were in. Does that make sense? Yep. Not? Questions? Yes. Exactly. And that whole assessment of those conquered people groups were based on what it may benefit the one that is in control. Okay? Does that make sense? That's a very good point. So, and there's much more we can say about honor shame. And when we think about it, when we think about shame, remember some comments Like Paul, when he says in Romans, for I am not what? Ashamed of the gospel. Okay? What was the gospel about? It was about a man who made a claim, who did miraculous things, who was what? His son. But he was what? By the Roman power. He was crucified on a cross. Not only was that foolishness, okay, to the Rome, but it was a stumbling block to the Jews, because anybody hung on a cross was a anathema, a curse, according to the law. You understand? So this is all based, Paul's comment on this, he's not ashamed of the gospel, because it's what? It's the power unto salvation, okay? And God used the shame things of the world to create the world that he wants it to be, okay? And that's his son being at the what? The throne, not Caesar, you know. Does that make sense? Exactly. And that's how it was in the beginning, okay? That's how it was at the garden, okay? You understand that? I mean, there was, the garden or everything after the garden is an illustration of the garden. That place where the domain of God and the domain of man, what? It overlapped, okay? But there was an order within that. And what was the order? You had the Creator God, and you had the man, and the Creator God did what? He said, you can do anything, but do not do this, and I will provide for you, okay? He asked Adam and Eve to honor him, to be loyal to him, to be, we use the word in the Bible, faithful to him. You see this context here? And but they chose what? They chose to dishonor God, okay? And choose for themselves what would be right and what would be wrong, okay? And from that point on, we have become a splintered human, okay? The wholeness that we had in the garden is gone. But God didn't just leave us out there all cracked up, okay? What did he do? He entered it, okay? And that's good news, because, a splintered, cracked life is not a good life, okay? We all know that. They knew that. But what they had was necessary for order. Because one thing that we do not like as mankind, we don't like disorder, okay? Even if that order is terribly oppressive, it's order, okay? It's order. Comments, questions? Yes. Mm-hmm.
Listen, my beloved brothers, has not God chosen those who are poor in the world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom, which he has promised to those who love him?
Exactly. That is honor-shame conversation, okay? That's how those people would understand it. They understood that this is about kingdom talk, okay? And, you look in the letters of Peter, and, they're making these claims that Jesus Christ is what? That Jesus is Lord and what? Savior, which is a direct contradiction of what is coming out from the top of Rome, which is, who is Lord? Caesar is Lord. You see? This is the culture that they're in. You know, if you go back to the beginning, in the garden, the design of man by God was man and woman were to be what? What does it say? We will what? We will create man in our what? In our image. So by design, and that man and woman that he has created in his image is designed to do what? And he will what? Or they will rule. Isn't that what the text says? Let's read it. Let's see. Verse 26, Genesis 1. Then God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over the livestock, over all the earth, over all the creatures that move along the ground. Okay? So, God has given us our value, hasn't he, guys? And our value comes from being what? His image bearer, okay? And his image bearer is to rule, okay? And the first thing that we have to learn to rule is not everybody else, but what? Ourselves. I mean, that's it. Is it hard to rule yourself? Yeah. Because what wants to take over? Ourselves, our interests, our desires. And you've read that in James, haven't you? Okay. Circumstances appear, and our impulse or our nature is to do what's best for me. For me to choose what is right and wrong. Okay? How does that been working out for us? Not well. How does it work out in your own life? In your own relationships? I've been married almost 40 years this August. Okay? I did not understand what it meant for two wills to be together. Okay? When I walked off of, I think in Lone Oak, off that stage, I've been here so long. Don't tell Pam I was thinking where. I forgot what church I was at. Okay. I was just thinking about the honeymoon. I'm sorry. So, but you know, I was pronounced something, wasn't I? Okay. What will we pronounce? Husband and wife. But did I know anything about how to be a husband, or did she know how to be a wife? No. Okay. Other than I was willing. But man, I didn't know. Has anybody else ever been there? What all of that was going to entail? Okay. Oh, it was like, okay. And that's where the commitment emerged. And that's through the trials is where we persevere in any relationship. Okay. Through the good and the bad. And we move through those trials. And that's what James is talking about. And we become more complete. Okay? We become more complete. And it's only through living as husband and wife that I learn to live and know what it is to what? To be husband and wife. Okay? So, from the beginning, from God's design, we were designed to reflect His image and to rule. And in order to rule, all people need to have a level of what? To rule wisely, you need to have what? Wisdom, don't you? Yeah. To rule and to reflect whose image, remember, whose image are we reflecting here? Our own? No, we're reflecting God's image, okay? We're bearing God's image. We're making decisions that will bring glory to me or glory to who? God, okay? Why? Because God is king. Jesus is king. This is not, you know, when Adam and Eve made their poor decision, their first experience when God appeared on the scene was what? What did they do? They hid. They were hiding because they were in what? Shame. Okay? Because they were not loyal to their Creator, their Master, their King, their God. Okay? Who's a good God, as James says. All great things come from Him. He's so good that He has allowed us, through His Son, a new what? A new life, he says. Okay? And we are as first fruits of that creation. Okay? Jesus was the first fruit of this new life. This new life that's only in Him. Okay? And now He has invited us to be part of that. Okay? James, his brother, at first, he kind of was skeptical about his own brother. Okay? And you know, I've read those places in John, and he talks a little bit about it, but I really didn't quite understand what the riff was. But there was some skepticism on choices being made and things like that. But we see that James, after Jesus was resurrected, Jesus went to his apostles, and he was seen by 500 people, and then he went where? To see James. Okay? So we see that from the resurrection, from the power of the gospel, James' life was changed to the point where he became and was recognized throughout Christendom as a pillar that Paul calls him. That him, Peter, and John were pillars of the Jerusalem church, where it all started, you know. James understood persecution. Josephus says that in AD 62 that he was stoned for his faith, his loyalty to who? King who? King Jesus. He was stoned. So when he tells them, if you'll turn back to James, consider it pure joy, my brothers, when you ever face trials of many kinds, or whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. He knows about trials, doesn't he? He knows what he's talking about. He understands what it's about. So, back to the honor shame. Think about in our choices and who we dishonor, who we are not loyal to during the choices we make. Think about Joseph. You remember Joseph was attempted to be seduced by who? Was it Potiphar's wife? Potiphar's wife. Okay. And what was Joseph's response to her? Y'all remember? I couldn't do such a bad thing to Potiphar. That's part of his thinking. But what was his basic bottom line? He couldn't dishonor who? God. He understood this honor, shame world that he lived in. Okay? And then let's go to King David. Okay? Go to the 51st Psalm. Obviously, the context of this is the adultery committed by David with Bathsheba, the subsequent meeting with the prophet who shared the word picture about the man that had the sheep. And from that, David was convicted. And he saw that conviction, and he placed that seed of guilt in a certain area. And he says, "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love, according to your great passion." I'm sorry, this is Psalm 51, verse 1. "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love, according to your great compassion. Blot out my transgressions. Wash away all my iniquities and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me." And here he says, "And against you, and you only, have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you are proved right when you speak and justified when you judge." So, in David's heart and mind, his sin was against who? God. Why God? Because God is King. God is Lord. And David understood that. Throughout his life, he understood that. And that's one of the reasons why I feel he was referred to as a man after God's own heart. He didn't go into idolatry. He made bad mistakes, and he made poor judgments relative to how he ruled his family. But he always understood the hierarchy of which he was in. And that is Jesus. That is, God is Yahweh. The Torah, the law, is what he lived under. He understood that. And when he sinned, he understood that not only was that sin something against others, but the basic thought based on the scripture is that he sinned against God. He brought dishonor to God. We should think of that more often. We should think of that more often. Okay? Do we think of that? Do you think we think of that? And what's ways to understand that? Think about that. Understanding that we were put on this earth to have a particular role. Okay? And it's not necessarily to be a physical therapist or a businessman or a janitor or a school teacher or a physician or an educator. But it's for what? To honor God, to honor Christ. And whatever blessing or work He's provided us for, our role in that is to, first of all, bring honor to Him. Okay? And when we don't, we bring shame to Him. Okay? And the consequence of that is not just about us, because people look at us with an understanding that we're representing something bigger than us, okay? And all people are looking for is an excuse not to follow the Lord, okay? And as Dan's pointed out over the last several weeks, people will look at us, okay, as that excuse. And that's not new to this covenant that we're under. It was the same thing with the Old Testament. Because one of the roles of the Israelites was that God would be seen and understood through the way they lived. And people would be attracted to them. And they would be a blessing. Okay? But unfortunately, we know how it worked throughout the Old Testament, is that once they got redeemed and got power, they did what? They started acting like the very people that had them enslaved. Okay? Okay? But we have a new king. And this King Jesus, He entered into this honor-shame world, this hierarchy of small at the top, large at the bottom, people that have no value because they have nothing to bring. And He did what to it? What's that? He turned it upside down. The what? What does the Sermon on the Mount say? The what will be? The first will be last. Okay? Blessed is what? The poor. Okay? In an honor-shame culture, those words, now we can understand them even more, can't you? At a gut level, to the people hearing those things, it's like, this is nonsense. This is nonsense. What time does this class stop, guys? 15 after? Okay, I'm sorry I went over a minute. So, we'll finish up here. Just back to James. And the first chapter again. And consider it pure joy, my brethren, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance, and perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything. We need to be mature and complete so that we can rule our lives, rule as God gives us opportunities to bring glory not to ourselves, but to Him. And it is through the trials that we have that we gain that perseverance that moves us into this mature existence. God bless.